Yes, I think there are some stark findings in this index that has been published for 2018. Despite strong GDP growth in the last 10 years, which grew by about 40%, the opportunities it generated in terms of jobs, particularly for our booming youth population, has barely moved marginally between 0.1 and 0.2%. Yet our youth population in Africa is set to skyrocket by about 26% in the last 10 years. And about 60% of the 1.2 billion people who live on our continent today are under 25 years. At the same time, we see great divergence in continental progress of 54 countries, where 15 of these countries accelerate the pace of progress. In particular, countries like Cote d'Ivoire, Morocco, Kenya show the most progress. But for 25 countries, which represent about nearly half of our population, the sustainable economic opportunity category, the performance has declined. I think another important indicator about the state of our continent is education, that education in outcomes are declining. And basically, with 52% of our population being youth, these have severe implications for the development of our continent. And lastly, I think that civil society space is shrinking. So while we have democracy and we have elections, the ability of people to voice their criticisms, to be able to raise their concerns, that space is shrinking.
Right. Let's talk a bit about that particular last point that you make on civil society and the role they should be playing to promote good governance. You know, some countries would argue and say that you're using the same yardstick on all of us, yet we have all different contextual issues, and so you're putting all of us in the same basket. So what then needs to be done in this particular case so that we are seeing individual countries being put to task on their individual shortcomings?
Well, I think that that's the nature of democracy. It's noisy, it's messy, and it is about people in power understanding that they are governing on behalf of citizens. And so I think that the issue of transparency, of accountability are very important. A large part of the lack of progress we show is related to corruption. It's related to, in South Africa, if you look at the impact of state capture, of those in power that undermine public institutions, including our state-owned enterprises, that created a nexus of corruption between those in political power and those in business. It has severe implications for the delivery of good governance, of sustainable development, of better education outcomes, better health outcomes, better supply-side measures on jobs. So it is not a luxury to say that people have a right to freedom of speech. We require an independent media that can act as a watchdog and inform and educate citizens about what is happening in their country. We have a right to join political parties, to form associations that can raise issues that are of concern to them, and we have a right to organize ourselves in terms of the freedom of association. These are integral to understanding democracy, and they are universal rights.
Right.
So civil society space is critical for the success of those particularly subcategories relating to accountability and transparency in a country.
Right. And so after churning through, this huge data, I mean, spanning from 2008 to 2017, and then coming out with this particular report, what next? For what? Because at the end of the day, governments will be saying that we are a sovereign country, this is according to them, and we'll continue doing what we do for our own citizens around our countries. So what do you do with this report?
Well, I think this is where citizens have a right to decide who they want in power, who they want in government. But I think if one is looking at what could potentially improve the state of governance and development on our continent, well, there are a number of things that we could be doing. There is a discussion on a common market area, a free trade zone for the whole of Africa, so that we stop acting as 54 countries. We're not islands. We're not, we are all connected to each other. We have a huge market opportunity there. So I think if we can start to look at the free movement of goods, services, and people across the continent, build a common market area across Africa, this is the way other parts of the world have succeeded. We need to look at regional integration. We need to strengthen public institutions. We need multi-sectoral and disciplinary partnerships that look at development. And we need to combine the notion of development from the bottom up with strong leadership and governance from the top down. So and importantly, and I think most importantly, to institute the rule of law, that no one is above the law.
Right.
And this is a critical element of our success as a continent.
Perfect. I want to finalize with just one quick question, because you have critics of such reports who would always want to know how viable, how true are these findings. How do you usually validate this report so that you can stand out and say this is a true reflection of what's happening in the countries you've assessed?
Well, this is an annual statistical assessment of government performance in every African country. And, the idea is that we measure the government's obligation to deliver public goods in the political, economic, and social sphere, and the citizens' right to expect such goods to be delivered to them. So we have many different sources of information. This is the most comprehensive collection of data on African governance and is used to rank the progress of country by country across Africa every year. And so the data itself, as a number of sources of information that goes from those like the Global Integrity, Africa Integrity Indicators, the Varieties of Democracy Project, Afrobarometer. We take information and data from a number of the UN agencies, the World Bank, the IMF, the World Economic Forum.
Right.
And we do individual surveys of satisfaction levels of African citizens. So this is truly the most comprehensive data on African governance that exists today.
All right.
Of course, there are many areas where we have to improve the collection of data, and that's something we are committed to doing, working with governments to improve the statistical collection of data so that we can organize our planning, our disbursement of limited resources we have in the most efficient and effective way across the continent.
Thank you so much. Naidoo, I'm afraid we'll have to stop it there because of time, but